And a good Monday morning, Birds fans. How are you? Hopefully your weekend wasn't as hectic as my partner, John McMullen's, who was probably bummed out that he had to do as much Eagle work as he did. Didn't allow him time to watch AEW action.
They drew 80,000 people, Jody.
They did. I know full well. I text you about it. I know they're number two, but they try harder. They did get 80,000 people into a stadium on Saturday night.
Tremendous success. Yeah.
Johnny Mac was busy with bird business. The Philadelphia Eagles, when last we spoke Friday after their Thursday final preseason game, had a day off. Oh, the coaches weren't off. They were evaluating film and making decisions. Cuts came out Saturday. Guys missing from practice on Sunday. Draw the conclusion that you will. The massive cut from 90 to 53 is not taking place here in Philadelphia because they've already told a bunch of guys that their services no longer needed, J-Mac.
Yeah, I mean, they officially released a number of vested veterans to give them sort of a head start. I think that was, sort of a little bit of a favor to beat the glut of players that are going to be on the market. As far as the waiver guys, the younger guys who get waived and have to clear waivers, go through waivers. A few of those have leaked out, but at practice yesterday, we were able to see who was there and who wasn't there. So of that group, Ian Book, which was reported, Kennedy Brooks, Freddie Swain, Johnny King, Tyree Jackson, reported Tyrese Robinson, Marvin Wilson, Caleb Sanders. We hardly knew you to learn your first name. Alabe Sagapulu. I think we decided to go with Jody. Robert Cooper, Quentin Bell, and Tyreek Maddox-Williams, who had the big, obviously, preseason game against Indy, but got here too late and obviously wasn't going to make the 53. So those are the guys who weren't at practice. So they've already been informed. And the other guys are the bubble guys and trying to make that last bit of effort and practice to say, hey, let's tilt it this way. Also part of it is you've seen a number of trades over the league with lower level players over the past few days. The Patriots picked up a couple offensive linemen yesterday. A number of these players, Howie, if they're not going to make the 53, we'll try to get something for them and see if he can work out things that way. So that's part of it as well. But the Eagles are not going to announce anything until the deadline Tuesday. At least I've been told that. So you might hear some, agents leaking that their guys are getting put on waivers. And even then, you got to be careful because sometimes they put that out there to indicate to other teams, we're going to release them. If you want them, you can play the gamble game on waivers. But if you give us a 7th round pick, a 6th round pick, you can have them. That's how sort of a Badarian Lowe or somebody gets traded. That's how that kind of stuff happens. You leak out that, hey, they're probably going to put on waivers, and they don't want to deal with it and say, we want the player. Let's give you a late round pick or something of that nature.
Right. And as you stated, we've already seen a couple of those type deals come down over the last 24, 48 hours. If you go so far as to let the guy know, and you're right, the Eagles have officially announced nothing, but some pretty good reporters are reporting guys who will not be with the team and they weren't there on practice on Sunday. So you can read into that pretty well. Those guys probably the Eagles determine, if we put them out there and say we'll take a 7th round pick, they're not getting it anyway, so they've already made those decisions. But it's down from 90 to 70, which means they've got about 17 more guys to cut. Out of those 17, how many do you think they're really debating still? They've got to have a number of them that they know it's only a matter of time. They might be playing that game that you're talking about. Maybe we can fake someone into giving us a 7th round pick, but we know they're not going to be on our roster. How many positions do you really think are still being debated at this stage?
Debated. I think they're pretty locked in by this point. I think the obvious one would be the sixth corner that we talked about so much. And if they even keep six corners, they might not even keep six corners. So I think that is still being debated, or it could be more of, I was talking to a former Eagles exec, could be more of what I just talked about, trying to trade somebody, trying to get something for one of those guys and hanging on as long as possible. Safety, has been obvious. How many safeties are you going to keep versus how many linebackers are you going to keep? So it might not even be. I think a lot of people get hyper focused on Nick Morrow's the fourth linebacker. It might be Nick Morrow versus Kayvon Wallace. Do you want to go 5 at safety versus 4 at linebacker? It might not be linebacker versus linebacker and safety versus safety. It might be that type of thing. But I think the one, at least my engagement, because people are very mad that I didn't pick Eli Ricks on my final 53. And I think people don't understand what I said. I don't mind. Like Jody, you said you think Ricks is going to make the team.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm in the minority. Far more people think he's going to make the team than me. But what I said was, I don't think it matters. In other words, if they decide to keep Mekhi Gardner, who I picked to make the 53, or they decide to keep the Eli Ricks, I think the other guys get through waivers and they're going to be back on the practice squad. And by the way, it might be Mario Goodrich, and I think the same thing. And it might be Josiah Scott, and I think the same thing. I'm not sure if Josiah is vested at this stage, but you can get him through waivers either way, I think. But that's always a gamble. That's always a little bit of a gamble. So that's what I was saying. Now, to me, I lean towards Gardner for this reason. It's special teams. If you're going to be that a sixth corner, you got to be a special teams guy. He made the big play in Baltimore, but I also want the PFF, and I looked at. He's got significantly more special team snaps. He was graded higher. He was one of their best special teams players in the preseason, if that matters, which it might not.
Right, because Rick got the pick 6 in a preseason game too. So you're going to evaluate the preseason special teams on Garner's.
No, I'm just trying to explain I'm trying to explain my decision making for those. In other words, for the sixth corner, like neither's going to play, and if either plays, it's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. And by the way, all these corners we're talking about have outplayed Calais Ringo, flat out. All three of them, Gardner, Ricks, and Goodrich, have outplayed Calais Ringo. And Josiah Scott also, what the former scout I was talking to said, versatility might also be a key. Well, Josiah Scott's the versatile one. Mekhi Gardner, a lot of people projected the safety, but the Eagles didn't play him there. But he's got some versatility as well. So that's all I'm saying. I'm trying to give people my thought process, but win or lose, I think all of them are getting through waivers. So that's all I was trying to say. I don't think it's that big of a deal. The Eagles might lean towards Ricks because they think he has an upside, a higher ceiling. Playmaking is a big thing. Ball skills is a big thing. That's one of the reasons Ringo has looked very poor in the preseason. His ball skills have looked not good, to be kind. And Ricks, obviously, and with the contextual nature of playing on the third team, has looked like he has significant ball skills. All of this stuff factors into it, but I think they can get them all back if they want them back. That's my larger point. Waivers is one of the most overblown thing every year. The average is about 40 guys get claimed on waivers across the league. Now the Eagles, because they're one of the deepest teams in football, they're susceptible of getting 3 or 4, plucked,
right?
Because that's what teams do. But teams that pluck a lot of players off waivers, conversely, I think Chicago had 4 or 5 last year. I mean, I always say you're either a disaster as an organization or you're rebooting after being a disaster of an organization, one or the other. Because you've had your own guys all summer and all spring. And remember where we are. If you're claiming somebody on Wednesday, they got 1 week to prepare.
You got 8 days to get them up to speed to play in the opener.
I mean, they're not going to be impactful. So, and look, the Eagles have lost players over the years. The most notable that, my buddy Mike Kay keeps bringing up, Noah Togiai. And I say, all right, yeah, they wanted Noah Tungiai. Sorry. They wanted him back. There's no question. Did it matter? At the end of the day, they ultimately got him back. He didn't do anything in Indy. He didn't do anything here.
They didn't pay a price for it.
And Brett Toth would be the other guy. Same thing. They really wanted him back. Arizona claimed him. He didn't do anything here. They got him back. He got cut again.
Yep.
I mean, all I'm saying is the fear of the waiver wire is just ridiculous. It really is.
It's not earth-shattering. You are correct in what you say. Here's why I think you and I might disagree. PFF, who we reference here on the show, and I think the NFL doesn't like to reference publicly, but behind closed doors.
Chris Collinsworth does.
Okay, so some people do, some people don't. But they certainly know it's out there, and all the players are adding to their own scouting, which is certainly more important that they're doing. Eli Ricks was the #1 ranked cornerback in preseason football. Of all cornerbacks who played at least 30 snaps, he was numero uno in the entire league, not on the Eagles, in the National Football League. So take PFF ratings for preseason games at whatever word you think it should be, but it's out there. And if your job is to not lose anybody, you would prefer to not lose anybody. You want to get you want to have the choice of all the guys that you've had in camp to invite back to your practice squad and to keep. I think part of the decision-making process is, well, which of the guys we're going to put on waiver, we're going to really, is most likely to get claimed. And let's just go through this one more time and see if we agree that this is the roster we're going to put together. I think that Ricks is the most likely guy to be claimed if they put him on waivers. Now, does that mean I think Eli Ricks is going to become a Pro Bowler? Probably not. You're right, John. We've got a couple of examples of guys who the Eagles wanted to keep, were upset that they lost. And oh, by the way, they got both of them back eventually anyway, and neither one of them turned into a starter or a major contributor for the Eagles. You're laying out the situation the way it has played out is absolutely on point. But they've got a decision to make here in the next 48 hours, and I just think that we may. I know I do. Whether the Eagles do or don't, only they know for sure. I think that Eli Ricks opened enough eyes that I think he could get claimed. If the Eagles put him on waivers, I think.
Well, and that's the point. And that's where I may be. Well, I agree. Number one, I agree. He's the most likely. If you said who's the most likely to be claimed, I would agree. It's probably Ricks. I would still say it's not that likely he's going to get claimed. However, and part of my reasoning for that was, look, everybody had a shot at this guy. The Eagles paid him $10,000 to come in here. I mean, yeah, everybody had a shot as an undrafted free agent, and he wasn't one of those guys who gets $200,000, $250,000. He got $10,000. Now, Reed Blankenship got $5,000, overcame it. So it's not a death sentence by any stretch of the imagination. But all these people had a chance at him, and we're doing the scouting, pre-draft, and all that kind of stuff. So that's number one. The second part is he made a good point, and I had to acknowledge it. The guy was texting with, and he said, because I'm hyper focused on the Eagles, which I admit, and I know the Eagles, and I don't know and I know what the Eagles do, and the Eagles. But there's two parts of this: self-evaluation and outside evaluation. He brought up the outside teams don't get to see practice. They don't get to see the Eagles practice. They don't get to see what they do. All they get to see is the preseason games. And he made splashy plays.
Who told you this?
It's a former scout with the Eagles.
Over the weekend?
Yeah.
Do you forget who told it to you on Friday?
He didn't. This was yesterday when I was texting him.
But do you know who told you the same thing on Friday?
Well, but you're not a scout. No offense, Jody. I mean, no. I mean, it's.
I know, but you're using it as reference as if he opened up your eyes on the weekend when you had this conversation. I said the same exact thing to you on Friday. John, the other teams only get a chance to see what happens in a preseason game. Yes. They're not an Eagles camp. I said that same exact thing to you on Friday.
But it's a different heft. And what he said was, there again, you got to let me finish these things. That people don't, that this is the only thing that bothers me about fans is they hear one thing and they stop. And they don't hear me say, it doesn't matter. The end game, it doesn't matter because I think all three will get through waivers no matter what the decision is. That's my larger thesis, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But of the three, yeah, Ricks is more likely for that reason. But the context of what he said as he continued, that's why you try to work the trade. That's why you try to get the 6th or 7th round pick. He's also the most likely to be traded. Now, for the Eagles self-evaluation, and again, I went through all the numbers. Not only did Gardner play more on special teams, he was more successful. So you bring up PFF. He was the #1 graded special teams player in Baltimore in the entire NFL. And they have a crappy special teams unit who, by the way, lost 2 of their best players, Zach McPherson and Sean Bradley, on injured reserve. So all this stuff factors into it. Now, nobody cares about special teams players until they care about special teams players. So it doesn't make him more likely to get claimed. I think he's going to get claimed. And again, the ceiling, to me, it makes it more likely that they're able to get a 6th or a 7th round pick. So he said the first part that you said, Jody, but he added the second part. That's when you try to work the phones. That's when you try to take advantage of maybe these whatever adjectives you want to use, bad organizations, that taken, context. Look, the whole thing, if you pick up a box score, right, and you see a pick 6, you say, wow, that's great. But then if you go to the game and you watch, it might be a tip ball, where somebody else made the play and he was just in the right spot, so-and-so. Now, that's not what happened to Ricks. He made a good play. But he made it against a 4-team quarterback who really telegraphed the football. So if you're watching, and good organizations are watching, they're not looking at the box score. They're watching and they say, oh, all right, nice play. Made the play. It was there for him.
Didn't
drop it. Coasted in. But so all of this stuff comes into it. But I would agree that he's the most likely of the 3 to get claimed, and maybe that tilts him. But from the standpoint of people, Bradbury in the slot too, that's something I think people have overjudged. And they say, well, if Bradbury's going to play in the slot, you don't need a slot, and then you can keep Ricks. And Bradbury was talking about it again yesterday. He was one of the players who talked, and he said again for the second time, we're just doing it in case and injuries. You never know what happens in a game. And guys, he's an outside corner. He's an all-pro outside corner. He's not going to play in the slot. And he keeps saying it, but if people don't listen, and by the way, I give Sean Desai a lot of credit too, because I think that's one place where he's different from Jonathan Gannon. Like, he's preparing for
emergency
catastrophe,
smart,
which I think is a good idea.
John Desai a lot of credit for that too. You and I are on the same page there. But here, let me ask you about this. And as you correctly state, the Eagles. You're there every day. You follow them. You talk to them. You've got sources. So anyone who questions that is foolish. But is there a chance that maybe with some significant changes to the Eagles, specifically their coaching staff this offseason, that their mindset has changed. The way they evaluate has changed, at least some. And I give you as an example your guy, Dan Arnold, who you raved about at practice and said, God, this guy catches
in the
everything.
spring, not in camp. I didn't rave
Okay,
about
well, from the time he donned an Eagle uniform, he opened your eyes in practice, and you thought that he opened up Eagles evaluators' eyes in practice as well. And then we got to camp, and then we got to the preseason games, and he didn't do much of anything. And he was part of the early cuts for this team. Now you got to take in the positional and the number of guys that are there and everything else that goes into it. But he was a guy who did well in something other than a preseason game, and he finds himself unemployed when the first cuts come down. Is there a chance that the Eagles have altered the way that they evaluate talent, and using Dan Arnold as an example?
No, because he played well in the spring. He played well in OTAs. When he got to training camp, he didn't play well. And I said that weeks ago. I said, I'm disappointed. He didn't show up in training camp. He hasn't pushed Grant Calcaterra at all. So he hasn't been good in practice, or he hasn't done much well, Grant hasn't done much either because they don't play anybody they think is going to be relevant. But yeah, he didn't show up in practice, and he didn't play well in practice. And that, yeah, I don't think it has anything to do. Now, the early nature of the cut, he's a vested guy. They cut all the vested guys. They gave them a head start. Whether, they'll frame it as they're doing them a favor, as I said, to beat the traffic. All the offensive linemen, they're all vested. So they don't have to go through waivers, so they can sign with anybody. And if anybody says, oh, we need a veteran offensive lineman, like the Patriots, they just traded for 2 offensive linemen. If they wanted a more veteran presence, maybe they call up Dennis Kelly and you give him a sort of a solid that way, but that's not the way it fell. So he just didn't play well in training camp. He played well in the spring. He showed up with no pads and shorts, and he showed his athleticism.
How many hours was that?
We had 3 practices, and he made a great catch in all 3 that we were open. But again, yeah, it's no pads, shorts, shirts, and he's a great athlete. I mean, I talked to Colin Thompson, our buddy, NFL tight end. He said he's a freak athlete, great receiver. When the pads came on, not the same. And that's maybe the reason why a great athlete, a good receiver, can't catch on anywhere consistently. He's played a long time, but he's bounced around a bunch of places.
And he was bounced out of Eagles camp this weekend. All right, Johnny Mac, I need you to do me a favor. John's going to run. He's got to go over. Eagles have media access and then a practice today. So John's going to skedaddle here in just a couple of minutes. Mark Farzetta is going to come in for him. And we've got our contributors. Jeff Kerr is going to jump in, and BLG Brandon Gouton. Over whatever hit him last week when he was under the weather and couldn't join us, he's going to do so this morning. All right. I did this yesterday on my CBS show, and I relied on my listeners to give me some insight, but I need more educated insight from a guy like you. I wanted to tier the NFL before the season started, 4 tiers. And the tiers I labeled as legit Super Bowl contenders, on the cusp, sorry, just short, and not happening. Okay. So I wanted to get 8 teams into each of those 4 categories: legit, on the cusp, just short, and not happening. So I got 8 at the bottom. That was easy enough. But I kind of got caught at the top and in the middle. I've only got 7 teams in my legit category, and I've only got 7 teams in my just short category, and I got 10 teams in my on the cusp category. So I need to move 1 team from on the cusp up to legit, and I got to move 1 team from on the cusp down to sorry, just short. You're not getting there. I give you the 10 teams real quick. I need you to move 1 up and 1 down, and the other 8 will stay right there in the on the cusp category for me. On the cusp for me: Cowboys, Ravens, Lions, Chargers, Jaguars, Seahawks, Steelers, Vikings, Giants, and Saints. Those are my 10 on the cusp. Out of those 10, which most likely do you think moves up a tier? Is the best of those 10 teams with Super Bowl possibilities?
And I'm going to use your I'm going to make people angry. Super Bowl possibilities. I'm going to use your definition. Dallas Cowboys.
Okay, and it's not an outrageous selection. I would
No.
think that most people do. I'm not as high on Cowboys as
Well,
everybody else.
part and the reason I say that is because maybe the Ravens are better, maybe the Jags end up being better. Those would be the two other teams I considered, but they're in the AFC where it's much more difficult. I don't think the Cowboys have as many hurdles, so that's when you say Super Bowl, I think Cowboys have a much easier path. And are a good team on top of it. So that's why I go the Cowboys.
That is very much legit. Believe it or not, you know who got moved up most out of my listeners? Dougie P's Jack.
Yeah, Jack. Good team.
Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence, I think he's going to be really good. And if he turns out to be as good as I think he's going to be, that's a good choice as well. But I just think it's tougher on the AFC side.
Certainly so. So which out of those 10 teams do you think doesn't even deserve on the cusp status? You would put them in the more just short group of the Broncos, the Bears, the Browns, the Packers, the Pats, the Falcons, and the Raiders. Who would you move down out of those 10?
I'm torn between two teams that played in the playoffs last year, Vikings and Giants. Because I don't think the Vikings are even trying to win any. I don't know what the GM is doing there, but they still have good skill position players. And I think Brian Flores is going to turn their defense from awful 31-32 to middle of the road 15-16. And they might win games a different way, because instead of having to score 35 to win, they might, he might knock off
7-28.
Yeah. And they might win games that way. So I'm going Giants. I don't believe in the Giants. I didn't believe in the Giants last year. I think they overachieved. I give them credit. I think they're doing great things, like long term, as I compare those teams. I think they have a good GM. I understand he's making good decisions. I just think they were so ravaged talent-wise. They still need a little bit more time to add talent. And they're in a division with the Eagles and Cowboys. So I think it's difficult from that standpoint.
Understood.
But
nobody voted the Giants moving up or moving down in my poll over the weekend. They were a non-factor, but I understand your I think I did get a couple of Vikings that the other team you were debating that the bottom has fallen out there. But those could have been Packer fans or Lion fans or Bears fans. You never really know who's checking in on your phones. Johnny Mac, thanks for the insight. Safe travels over to South Philly. Tomorrow is the true pre-cut day. You get some hints today. You get some info today. You'll be on with us.
No, they're done early. I'm told. So they're down to 70 and they're going to wait. And like I said, I think, there's some potential trade baits in there trying to hold on to people, trying to get some draft picks, maybe even how we make them
keep a lid on it all day today, even after practice. You know what I mean?
No, they can't keep a lid on agents. So, if somebody wants it out there, he'll get it out there.
And Johnny Mac will be grabbing it and sharing with us tomorrow. Thanks, brother. I'll talk to you in the morning.
All right. Thanks, guys. And thank Mark Barzetta. I see him there smiling as always, bringing the energy, the Brandon Graham of our group, and Jeff Kerr, the great Jeff Kerr. Thank you, Jeff Kerr. He's not looking up, though. Yeah, there we go. I got it. All right.
Oh,
thanks.
Damn. That's the most crowded green room we've ever had. Do it once. We've got both Farzetta and Kerr ready to go. Johnny Mac will be back tomorrow. We'll be back on Birds 365 with Farzy and with Jeff Kerr. Stick around.